Good Friday morning and welcome to Account Based Friday. It's been a while since I've been on here. Meg handled things last week. Thank you, Meg, for handling this last week. Meg and I have been doing this for 3 years now. We've had over 250 videos. We always start off with some administrivia. We're going to introduce our special guest from Florida, Donald C. Kelly, who just attended not only Dreamforce, but Inbound, and has some relevant sales information. And today's topic that we're going to be talking about is outbound selling strategy. The reason I asked Donald to join us was I was listening to one of his live broadcasts on LinkedIn and realized how many of our clients and prospective clients are turning up the dial on outbound as a strategy. And so I thought it would be worthwhile to get a sales perspective and an expert perspective nonetheless on outbound. So invited Donald to come in. Just as a reminder, in the upper corner, if you have questions about go-to-market best practices, we have those videos that I mentioned earlier. Just click on the QR code. It'll bring you right to our YouTube site, and it'll have all the information there. If you have questions, you can pop them down below in LinkedIn. We're now broadcasting across Meg's LinkedIn network as well as Donald's LinkedIn network. If StreamYard's working right, we should be able to get to your question and pop it up. So feel free to pop it up. And we start each week with a poll. So let me bring up this week's poll. And we kept it topical to the outbound selling strategy. And the question was cold calls. Do you even take a cold call right now if a vendor can help? And about 2/3 of the audience said, no thanks. And another third said, yes, I'm open to it. Now, this is a point in time. I'm sure it's probably changed if you asked the same question 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I voted yes because, in fact, I took a cold call earlier today. I wasn't expecting. And it's kind of like Christmas. You unwrap it and you don't know what to expect. This particular cold call went well from my perspective. But not every cold call is like that. I still appreciate, though, that people are doing that. But not everybody does. I don't know, Meg, how did you respond to this?
I voted yes as well. I think it's kind of in the never say never category. Do I take a lot of cold calls? No. And a number of them are not very effective. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm sorry for that person because they're wasting a lot of time. But once in a while, if something intrigues you or piques my interest and I think, okay, I'll talk to you. But it's a pretty high bar, I would think, for most of us. So even if we said, yes, we're open to it, there's, sort of a challenge then for the salesperson doing the outbound calling to be that, be the one that is the call that you take. But Donald, we're excited to get your perspective on this. Thank you so much for joining us today.
100%. I'm excited. And there's a lot of opinions that I have regarding, the whole cold calling strategy and does it work? And even some of this stuff about taking it. I'm in a camp of, I take cold calls every so often. And yeah, but we can go into depth in that.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe share a little bit about what are you seeing trend-wise with cold calling, and would love to get your perspective on just the profession of outbound and cold calling right now.
Yeah, so cold calling is something that has worked for time. It's always worked, but let's be real. Like the efficacy of it's more challenging than before. If we were going to compare and say like, well, in the 80s, cold calling worked. Of course it did. We didn't have caller IDs, and you pick up a call. It's great. Somebody's calling and reaching out to me. In the 90s, similar way, end of the 90s, we started getting caller ID and we became a little bit more annoyed with people calling us at home. Early 2000s, we kind of abandoned that. It was still a practice that we used for business, but the consumer relationship started trickling over. And then the workforce that was in the ones that were taking the cold call, I think made an adjustment as well. So like, say, for instance, right now, when you look in our era, we grew up in a time period where, yes, we did get calls at home and we did get those cold calls, but the 50% of the decision makers are in that millennial category, or we're going to see the Gen Xers, and kind of like around that same kind of relationship where we were introduced and we spent a lot of time with caller ID, and we felt like we want to give permission when we are ready for it and not to be pushed upon. So that, I think we understand that kind of component. So then that adjusted the way that our consumer relationship affected our business relationship. But still nonetheless though, like I feel, this is my feelings with cold call. If you have a problem and I'm able to bring up that problem to you quickly, and that's where we go back to relevancy with cold call. If you can be relevant with an issue that I have, or an issue that I may not necessarily know I have, but you're able to pinpoint it within that set first 7 seconds, I'm going to be open to learning more at that point, and continue to dialogue. But how do you get me on the call in the first place? Yes, it's fewer and far between where everyone is not picking up every single phone call, but this is where it comes in with your preparation. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I believe it was a question that came up a little bit in our prep call. We were talking about, how much is preparation important and so forth. And we're going to talk about social. And the way I like to do it is I like to create some warm calls, essentially, by doing my prep work beforehand, or doing some social enrichment activities beforehand, which lay the groundwork for my cold outreach. And still yet, again, there's a percentage of people that are going to pick up the phone. So when they do, you just need to make sure you have a compelling enough of message, because we're annoyed by people who are calling us to do work, to help them do work to us, or help them sell to us. And that's not fair.
So what would you say if you were giving someone advice on how to prepare to do some cold outreach, and they've got a list of names, they know who they're trying to target, or engage, maybe a nicer way to say that. What would you advise? What would be sort of a minimum viable pre-work kind of kit for them?
So there's a concept that we could talk about called a 3x3. Identify 3 things within 3 minutes before you make a call to a particular prospect. But I would go even before you even do that. We're coming up on Halloween, and this makes so much more sense now. If anyone's familiar with South Florida, there's a place called Wellington. Wellington is an equestrian community. Between like October and April, we're going to have everyone from around the world come to Wellington for equestrian polo and all this other stuff. But Wellington is it's a pretty affluent community. So when we did trick-or-treating as a kid, that's where we went, because we knew Wellington was going to have the big candy bars, like the families there. So everyone went to Wellington. You get some really good candy bars. And the way that we did it was, you have X amount of time. Maybe you have like 2 hours to go trick-or-treating. Am I going to go on every house? Of course not. I'm going to go to the houses with the lights on that are in Wellington. So when it goes to cold calling, back in the days, maybe you could call anyone in your industry. You could say something silly, and marketers, you probably appreciate this. But in the past, in the days, we could say, yeah, everyone benefit from our product, and potentially they could. Everyone could use a smartphone, but not everyone wants an iPhone. So there's a segmentation that starts to come. So when you're doing your cold outreach, I like to look at it like this, and I tell them to go onto LinkedIn. And what I do with my team and with the clients that we train is, you want to look for those triggers. We build a list based on people who are active on LinkedIn and have trigger activities. So trigger activities that are beneficial for me are maybe like a VP of sales that's new to the organization, because LinkedIn has data that says they're 60% more likely to make new investment even when they're new. Yes, more people are going to bum rush them, but they're open to making change at that new stage. So that's a trigger for us. And then obviously maybe something like a growth, or maybe there's LinkedIn participation for us, because we sell LinkedIn prospecting courses. So if their team's not active on LinkedIn, that's a good trigger for us. So we have several things that we can utilize as we make that conversation to them now when we do our cold outreach and we're pitching. But that's one of the first component, is building the right list. There's other tools out there. There's one called EvaBot, if you ever heard of them, and there are several others, but it's an AI function. And what it does, especially for those who are doing account-based marketing, you can have several triggers that you might look for. And EvaBot essentially goes out and does that pre-work for you and give you those premonition, or those triggers that the organization may have. Maybe, for instance, that there's some kind of mention in the news, or maybe something in their 10K that you typically look for when an investor says we need to do blank, then that's a trigger. Maybe they say they need to do cold outreach, right? But you can find some of these things that may be able to be a trigger, but for you as a sales rep to go hunt that down might take time. But EvaBot, you can check them out. It's a great tool, but that allows for me now and for sellers, if we're going to go do cold outreach, to be even more pickier. I'm not looking at volume here. I'm not looking at who can make the most cold calls. That's like the dumbest thing in the world. What I'm looking at, who can make the most quality call. On our team and the clients, we look at three main KPI on a day-to-day basis when they're making calls. One, meaningful outreach activity. So again, for us, a phone call is a meaningful outreach activity. A LinkedIn in conversation is a meaningful outreach activity for Evan Convo on LinkedIn. And then obviously your effective emails that you're sending out. So those are some meaningful outreach activity. If they're going to say, well, I'm going to go down the street and go to the nearest Chamber of Commerce, I mean, like, that's not meaningful for us. That's a silly. That's not our fit's not there. So do the right activities. Two is then meaningful conversation. And the way we identify meaningful conversation is like, if I call in and I did speak to a receptionist, that may not be a bad thing. If I spoke to the receptionist and then she shared with me that Mandy is the best person to speak with, however, she's not usually here on Fridays, and you need to speak to Carol, who makes the decision on this stuff. That was meaningful. I got intel that can help me move along this path towards this introduction of our company. So that was meaningful information. I got more people. And then appointments book. So then there's no way in that we're going to look at the volume. Now, naturally, that does happen. If my sales rep is making 5 phone calls a day, then maybe there's some questions that we need to ask. But I'm not looking to say, well, Mary made 100 phone calls today, gold badge. How many of those were actually meaningful? How many meaningful conversations did you get from that lead to anything? So that comes back to this idea again. We want to hyper focus on the accounts that we're going after and that they have triggers, because the key word, and I did this in I talked about this recently, and I talk about it all the time. My favorite word as a B2B cold outreacher is relevant. There's a whole concept, and I hinted at this at a little bit beginning when I, my view on cold calling. If it's relevant, then so be it. If I get a cold call telling me for my, factory warranty for my car, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the dumbest thing. I don't need that. But if I get a cold call telling me like, Donald, I noticed that your podcast has been around for X number of years, and you have 500 plus, 200 plus likes on your reviews on your podcast, and saw that the names of people that you're bringing on. I haven't seen any A-listers based on your sites. If you were willing to, if I could show you a way to get A-listers on your podcast, such as Mark Cuban, would you be open to that? I'm a Mark Cuban fan, so I would say, of course, I would love to have Mark on the podcast. That's relevant to me and to what I'm doing. And the same concept is like, we need to look for those triggers, look for the things that makes it more relevant, that there's a point to why I'm reaching out to you. If you're fishing to say Donald's a podcaster, therefore I should send him a message, that doesn't work. It needs to be something that may be beneficial to me. If my show has 10 listeners, then it's kind of dumb for you to think that A-lister is going to want to come on that show. But a show that's an established show, perhaps that's what's going to happen. And now I'm telling marketers this. Great. I'm going to get some emails now. But I'll take the call. But that's to answer the question, a long-winded answer here is: one, focus on a target list. Use tools like Sales Navigator, which gives you guidance on that, and also like tools like EvaBot that helps you to really limit your focus. And then you can start, and then you identify trigger things that you can use in your cold outreach. But even before we make that cold outreach, what we do with our team and the clients that we train, there's several different layers of this, and marketers may appreciate this. One, we are fighting for attention. So one, we have to grab their attention from the jump on LinkedIn. Two, we have to get them to engage with us. Engagement might be you accepted my connection request, or maybe you like something on my, one of my posts or whatnot, like my comment on your post. That's engagement, right? Then three is conversation. If you can get that person in a conversation, money in the bank, because that leads to more activities, and then the conversation leads to appointment. So here's an example. I might see that, for instance, Brian just got a new job as a VP of sales for this company called ringlight.com, and they're within my wheelhouse. And I reached out to him, and he said something on LinkedIn. It's like, Brian, congratulations on a new position with Ringlight. Whatever. Like, it looks like a bright future ahead. I'm looking at my ring light right now. It's lame, but bright future ahead. PS permission to connect here on LinkedIn or whatever, or hey, Brian, some of my friends work over at Ringlight, saw that you're there. Congrats on a new role, whatever. But Brian might accept it, or Brian does a post on whatever else. Maybe it's just around that he went, he's a big fan of climbing and he was just in Utah and climbed, some mountain stuff. I'd be like, dude, love it. Went to school out in Utah, never climbed. Out of curiosity, if a first-time climber, any place you'd recommend I try in Utah, permission to connect here on LinkedIn. But I'm having a conversation around something that matters to Brian that he posted, because again, that's one of my criteria. Somebody who's new to their role and has posted in the last 30 days. And you can get this all on LinkedIn. Sorry about that. That's Apple's features there. Just did the balloons. But when I do that now, I have a much better chance of conversing and engaging with Brian. Brian then will probably engage, grab his attention. He's going to go ahead and probably accept my connection request. And then he'll probably reply back like, permission granted. Of course, I'd love to connect. Or yeah, you should definitely try, Provo Canyon, like whatever. He gives me something, like, appreciate that. I got attention, got engagement, and I started a conversation. I can continue that dialogue. But then now my email and my cold call, my email probably be related to that subject line, like Provo Canyon it is as a subject line. That email is going to get open. My conversation to him is my phone call. Now this is ideal, right? It doesn't happen like this all the time. But my cold call to him now is when he does pick up that phone, I'm just going to jump straight into that. And even my voice message, I'll leave that with him. I'd say, hey, Brian, this is Donald. Thanks again for the tip about Provo Canyon. I'm going to test it out next year. We go out to Utah. Curious though, I noticed that blank with whatever problem that has to be relevant to him. Would you be open to that? You can feel free to reply to this, give me a call back. I'm also sending an email that you can just reply back to if that's okay. But now the fact is, there's probably going to be a high chance that he's going to reply because of the engagement that we already had beforehand. Now you might say, well, that takes work. Well, what doesn't? Like, this is life. Like, this is what it is. But if you want to go do the rapid dial of 100 calls, 200 calls in a day, yes, go ahead and do that. But if you have strategic accounts you're going after, if you're doing focus accounts you're going after, and I tell my team, everybody, what we're trying to do is maybe have like 40 accounts, 30 to 40 accounts, maybe 30 accounts that are going on over trying to go after over the next 6 weeks or whatnot. Maybe 2 months, but in that you're multi-threading as well. So we're not only going for the VP, but we're looking for somebody that probably at the maybe a end user, in our case a sales rep, and then also sometimes the marketers, like the VP of marketing or somebody that's in marketing, or maybe someone in enablement. Those are the people that we see tend to be our cool people to connect with. So now if I can build a multi-thread, or to start building connecting with the folks, the ancillary people around Brian, it gives me an opportunity. So in 4 people in an account that I'm going after that has a trigger because they have a new VP of sales and they're growing and they're posting on LinkedIn, like the leader is posting on LinkedIn or whatnot, there's some avenue for me there to be able to have some good conversation and to bring a good value proposition towards that. But now I have 4 times 30 accounts. You can start to see how that number increases. There's 120 human beings that I need to get in touch with, as opposed to just, I made a bunch of calls, I made 30 calls and nobody's answering, so therefore the list is dumb. Like, no, you got to start over. I was rapping there for a little bit and I got excited. So I'll open up for some questions here.
Well, I tell you, you had a lot of great content in there and of everything, because you spoke my language there on the food and the Halloween analogy that you started off with. I'm going to hijack that analogy because it's topical, timely, and I love food. So it's but very great analogy that you use there. And what I'm hearing you say is kind of like prioritized outbound. If I were to net it out, like don't focus on the great unwashed, focus on the prioritized outbound efforts to succeed, is kind of what I'm hearing in everything that you said. Is that an adequate summary of how?
Yeah, we need to hunt now with spears and with spears. Let's use that more appropriate word right now. But we need to hunt with spears rather than with the net in this era of outbound, because we only have so many shots towards this towards that animal you're going after, because once they get spooked, they're not going to come back for you to do that again, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. Unrelated to that, you did do a lot of travel here in the last week. It sounded like you
Sure.
did both Dreamforce as an influencer, multi-year influencer of Salesforce, and then you flipped over to HubSpot's Inbound. Was there anything that struck you as unusual from a selling perspective, or AI is very topical right now too, and you mentioned EvaBot as an AI option, but was there anything there that you heard that you're like, that's kind of interesting or unusual?
Yeah. So this is not official data from any of those organizations. This was in conversation with a colleague at one of these conferences. This colleague said that he spoke with a lady prior to this conference, to any of the conferences, but he spoke to her prior to the event, and she said last year she had 150 BDRs. 150 business development reps. You can do some math. 150. Let's say they're 50 grand a year, maybe or so. It's some pretty change. Guess how many BDRs that team now have in 2024? This particular company, not account executive, but business development rep. What do you say?
35.
35. What you got? What do you think?
I don't know. 20.
0. They cut all of their BDRs, and guess how much their numbers has improved?
50%.
Improved. Really? I wouldn't even have said improved.
The numbers absolutely the same. So then the same amount of appointments that we're getting with a BDR, they're getting with a robot, an AI tool to be able to answer questions, reply to emails, book appointments, or whatnot. So that was interesting. I don't know what they're using in particular, but it triggered this conversation because we're talking a lot about AI. So here's what I'm going back at. Like, there's this, if we are going to be an order taker, and if we're just going to dial, and if we're just going to do spray and pray, then our days are numbered. But if we're going to be strategic, and if we're going after accounts that we can book appointments with and help to advance and be in helping deals, then we're going to see improvement. And a couple of things that with some of these conferences, Salesforce in particular, they have something called Agent Force. And that's what they're looking at. It's not to replace the BDR, but it does augment the relationship, the responsibilities of BDR. There was another study HubSpot brought this up at their conference that CEO pointed out that this average seller is selling about 2 hours per day in actual customer facing responsibility. Then in the state of sales, recently in Salesforce state of sales, they said about 70% of a seller's time is doing non-selling activity, and that's been continuing for a number of years. Before that, I think Salesforce, LinkedIn pointed that out as well. So the data is still not lying there that where about 30% of the seller's time is selling. So what is it that what do we need to look at this, and what kind of the finding? So with AI, what I'm discovering is, and especially tools like Agent Force, the majority of that stuff is admin and also prep work. If I can use AI tools to help me to do some of that administrative and prep work, even if I got 10% more of my time to do more spear hunting, I'm going to be so much more effective. And the same idea with a BDR. If a BDR can make more spear outreach calls, because it has more, that individual has more intel from Agent Force or from some kind of AI tool, it helps enhance their ability. HubSpot said that they saw a 86% increase in conversion, or the conversion rate now is now 86%. I'm not sure it was 86% increase, but it's at 86%. Their conversion rate is now 86%. And what happened was they're using AI as well to prep beforehand. So you come in as an inbound lead before the BDR calls or anything like that, that we're gathering intel on you and on your behavior on our website, and also information in CRM that we can in public domain stuff. And that then allows for an email to be instantly tailored towards you in preparation for that conversation. And now I'm feeling like, holy moly, this rep, Pierre really spent some time to prep, to warn me or to guide me in preparation for this. And how did they know I was interested in this stuff? Now you're giving me the stuff that I need. That is helping. If I did that on my own, I wouldn't have time to do that for every single inbound lead, but that made their conversion rate now about at 86%. So that's one of the big conversations that I'm seeing from the AI world. I don't think it's something to fear. I think it's something to embrace in a way that's going to be effective. If you're an order taker, yes, you should fear it. The end is near. But if you're not an order taker, this is going to be something that's going to enhance and help you. My alma mater is Brigham Young University, and I had a conversation. We started a rousing debate at the beginning of the semester. I teach one class as an adjunct per semester, just to kind of give back. And one of the things that we talked about was that, and I was being the devil's advocate with this, and some of the students, they pointed out and it comes back to the same thing, the level of complexity. And then the fact is that we still want human to human relationship. That makes it very well that we want that the seller's going to be around for a little bit, especially the non-order taker seller and people that helps you to change paradigm. If a seller can help you to do that, that's something that it's easier done. It's not as easily done with an AI, at least not yet. And I think for our generation, everyone that's in this, even the Gen Alpha, they probably will be more appreciative of the of human being relationships a little bit. We've seen that with the Gartner research, and I feel like I'm touting all of these research, but Gartner pointed out, it's a famous stat, and I can share the link, but they said that forgot what it was, like 60% of people said that they wanted to have a seller free, of a millennial specifically, so they wanted to have a seller free experience. But then 25% of them afterwards had buyer remorse. So there's still a level of people that want to have the buyer relationship, with a human being. And I think those people makes it, those things make it that the human relationship is still so critical, at least, I don't know for how long, maybe the next 20, 30 years, maybe not that long, 10 years. If we're going to get a really good AI that can do everything that I'm doing and have that emotion, maybe. But I think for right now, we feel that the order takers are in jeopardy. The consultants, people can add value, change mindset, change paradigms, the human relationship, and go through complexity easily. They're going to be around, and AI can assist them to be more effective and to help more people. And then another finding that I saw, HubSpot is the search people, right? And that's how, at least when I first started looking at, in most of us marketing back in the days, we saw them as that. But they said by 2026, or the CEO, she said by 2026, search is going to decrease by 25%. And again, because most of us are going to AI tools to get information, to chat, rather than to go to a Google search. And then the other component that they pointed out too, because it's tougher, right? Everyone is facing growth challenges. But one of the other challenges is because the platforms that we're on, Wellington and like Facebook and some of these other platforms, if you don't understand how the game is played, they make money from advertisers. So they're trying to keep your prospects on their platform longer. Even with tools like this or whatnot. But if we can keep them on the platform longer, it prevents them from leaving, and then advertisers get happy and so forth, because we're the product on these platforms. So they're not seeing a big jump in these platforms like LinkedIn. Again, they're not doing a whole lot of pushing to say, I'm post my blog, it's going to push them back to my website and go into my inbound funnel. Like that that mousetrap is not working as effectively anymore because of that. So what do we do now? Is doomsday, is it end? No. So it goes back to the conversation that we started off with. So my findings there and so forth, if with all of these challenges and with all of the stuff, we need to be better at social, on the platform, on LinkedIn, not so much as I'm going to go to LinkedIn and then push them to my website. It's now I need to change the terrain in which I hunt, and that hunt needs to be on that social platform where the buyer is hanging out the most. And that's where I come in. And a final note on that, last year, 40%, HubSpot CEO, again, I always love her keynotes. She said that 40% of executives mentioned that they discover new solutions through social, and where's social are they spending more time on? And obviously that's going to be LinkedIn. So if there's anything that's going to help you right now that I discover from all of these things, one, don't be an order taker, be more precise, and bring bring relevancy to prospects, and 2, go where the prospects are hanging out the most and become more apt with that environment. And that environment is LinkedIn.
Well, it's always good advice to go where they're giving out the big candy bars.
See you in Wellington in a few weeks.
I think so. Absolutely. No, and Donald, thank you. This is all really, really good advice. And I think it's helpful too for marketers to hear how you're thinking about what you need to be effective as a seller. And I mean, the bar's high.
Yeah.
Right? It's really high. So as marketers think about what they can do to help, I think keeping in mind the things that their sellers are going to be doing and worried about, and thinking about ways to help is going to be the way to keep your marketers relevant as well. So they're not going to, and they can't be the equivalent of order takers. They need to be advisors as well.
And really good point with that too, like, equipping those sellers, and it becomes even more vital for this relationship to be more fluid and to be on the same page, where we are talking to the buyer, the marketing department, marketing is talking to sales, and we're all on the same page with the goal of, I'm going to hunt wildebeest. So the coordination just needs to be so much more effective and timely and precise. But here's the other part to this. So my business started off from me being a marketer. I studied business marketing in school, and they didn't have a sales program. That's one of the reasons why I'm so loving this role where I do adjunct. It's cool to see that about 5 years ago they developed a sales program, and being able to be a part of that initial stuff was exciting. But most schools are now taking advantage of creating their sales program. But in the marketing world, when I first came out and I started doing my business, started doing my my jobs and so forth, the business opportunity came a number of years later when I started this idea. A friend told me about a podcast, and I was like, what is that? And it was internet radio, essentially. So we're like, all right, cool. I like being on a radio. I'm a speaker and so forth. And so I started a podcast as a software sales rep, and it did a couple of things for me, Meg. What it did was it provided an opportunity to be able to practice, share my skill set and help other people as I was being successful as a B2B sales rep. But then I started focusing on marketing and sales, and I had to fine tune my reach until, to where we are now. But initially, what started to happen because of this marketing tool, I remember one of my coworkers, I discovered I got an opportunity for my software day job because of the podcast, where I was able to sit down with this executive at another company, and it developed an opportunity that we had, and put it in Salesforce and all that jazz. It was really exciting. And this started opening up my eyes. But then before my business really took off, I left my full-time job. I started to get people who would reach out to me and say, hey, can you help me with X sales problem? And I got business opportunities from this podcast. And I started to scratch my head. This hobby was turning into a potential business. And then a couple of years later, I found myself leaving my full-time day job to go and develop this business, which we have right now. But inadvertently, about 4 or 5 years later from that, one of our clients came to us and said, hey, I see what you're doing. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you're getting leads from your podcast. That's how you're growing your business. And I'm like, heck yeah, I am. Can you do that for us? And I said, no, we're a sales training company. And then he pushed me for like 6 months. I finally went to my production team and I said, hey, what if we did another show? Would you be open? And they said, yeah. So then now we started, I started producing content for other brands. And that grew. I'll tell you, this all ties back together now. So then we started Tesse Studios, which we've been just kept on a hush hush on the side. And it's kind of like that little redheaded stepchild, right? And we just got referrals for that. And now we're finally doing all the marketing stuff. Like our website's going to overchange and all this stuff because we're going to market with it. Because here's what happened that we saw. Go back to the thing that we just said about HubSpot CEO last year. 40% of executives are discovering content and using that, discovering offerings on platforms. I'm not telling you go post your podcast episode on LinkedIn and hopefully people come back. But what now happens is that you need to be the educators on those platforms. So some of those video clips, we're taking those short, and you see LinkedIn doing this now, taking those short form video clips and posting it on their platform. Imagine if we can have our executives, and we started doing this for some of our clients, interview their executives. And this all ties back to my sales business too, because now we're putting their executives out there with short form content that our team would record and edit with it, answering some of the objection or top of funnel or top level questions or impressions that people might have. Now they're presenting facts and presenting insights, which then pushes them back to be able to go to their company LinkedIn page, or at least bring them as brand relevance in their niche. And then naturally what happens is that those turns into business opportunities. And then when they do, like one of our clients recently, similar thing, they shared a lot of more of this content to educate those executives and the potential customers, and they're getting leads from their business, which then we do sales training for their sales team. So I'm burning both sides of the pipe here, but we're seeing that because we did it all at the beginning. But this only happens when sales and marketing work together. Again, I was a one-man show back then, but then now we see how the power of how these two groups are supposed to be intertwined, and magic starts happening, because I feel that we're in a second era of the content. And when content was king, we heard back in the days, but now that was in the blog era. But I feel right now like amazing content is the new currency, because then now that's kind of like you guys could stop me here, but I get excited for all this stuff. It was when we were making phone calls to the house back in the days when I was doing timeshares, and we were calling people at 6 o'clock and giving them Kohl's and Best Buy gift card when I was in college. Like, that was good, but then all of a sudden that business died instantly when the FCC said like you can't do calls to people's house anymore, you're going to get sued and all this other stuff. So that company went up. I worked for them for one semester. But here's what I did see though. Did those businesses all die? No, they just went to digital, and they had like videos, and they had ads, and they had ways of attracting you. So it's just a different way to be able to go about doing so. You have to be nimble. So the same concept now with B2B selling, where the blogging, yes, that still worked, maybe to some degree, drive people back to the site. Yes, I don't want to get any marketers offended. And content, like video content, is the rise right now. And if we can present ourselves with that and attract people, we can still bring them back to us. And we're seeing that to work. So marketing and sales should be together.
That is awesome. Awesome content there. So in addition to the Halloween candy, I'm taking away LinkedIn is the other area to really hone in on. And we're a few minutes over time. Donald, this is the best way to get a hold of you if somebody has interest, because we're getting a lot of positive comments here. Kadeem said, you're giving me gems right now. Love that.
You got fans.
you got your fan group is definitely chiming in. So it's awesome. No, that's terrific feedback. And we could talk about this all day long. And here's another one: injecting video into email nurture campaigns.
Yes.
Yeah. So great conversation. And joking aside about the Halloween, what I'm also hearing you say is you're not just spraying and praying. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing a lot from our prospective clients with boards and CEOs, that for right or wrong, they're probably not coming from the sales or marketing DNA. They might be coming from VC DNA or PE DNA of, well, you got to do outbound, and nobody knows the how. Like, how do you go about doing outbound? And what I'm hearing you say is take a really thoughtful and methodical approach, and you'll be successful. Can you throw spaghetti against the wall? Yeah, you can, but it may not stick. So, you only have limited attention, limited time. Focus on the priority is what I'm kind of hearing. Meg, any closing thoughts from your perspective before we wrap up here?
This has been super helpful. Thank you. That's my closing comment. I think, we've all, taken away a few gems, to quote Kadeem, from today's conversation. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. And everyone that's listening, I would say, if you haven't done so already, these folks here are doing amazing stuff. You better go ahead and take one of their links and share it with somebody else, or send a personal message, because they'll probably I love every time you guys post content. It's great stuff. So get somebody else to be able to check it out. And if you want to connect with me, just send me a message on LinkedIn. You can follow, but just I'd rather you connect and send a personal message, and we could start a dialogue at that point, or go to thesalesevangelist.com, and we could party either one of those ways.
Awesome. And I'm coming down to your house in 4 weeks for Halloween. And with that, we're back here next Friday. Meg, I think we have a mystery guest next Friday. Is that?
I think we do too.
Yeah, exactly. So stay tuned. for our mystery guests. Next Friday, same time, would be 11 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Pacific. Donald, thank you for investing the time, and we'll see you next week.
Happy Friday, everyone.